Hi, welcome you all to this special class on Unacademy YouTube platform, Unlock platform. So today, as part of our class, we will be looking at uh, all these. Today we'll be looking at the UPSC Mains General Studies Public Administration Paper 1. We'll be discussing the Paper 1 Public Administration. Right. So before we start our discussions, let us look at the courses that are offered on an academy platform. Before we start our discussion, let's look at the courses that are offered on an academy platform. As you can see it on your screen, you have this save more on combo subscriptions. You can get 5,000 off on this combo subscription and 10,000 off on all iconic combo subscriptions. And this is valid till 25th of February 2022. You can use our code PKS10 to get this 10% discount also. Then you also have this iconic subscription. You have iconic subscription wherein you have a personal coach and live mentorship, study planner, open house with educators, mains question and answer practice also. Yeah, it will be in a arsenal. This will be I will be discussing the whole paper in 2 hours. So I'll be looking at the most important points only. In fact, you can use this as an opportunity to ask questions from the previous classes also. You also have this UPSC CSE batches comprehensive, right? And you have English medium starting from 23rd February and Hindi medium also starting from 23rd February. You can call this number. You can see it on the screen here, 858585 and 85 and 85. The classes will be starting from 23rd February, and you will also get as part of this iconic subscription 20 GS books also, and optional courses launching in the month of February. You can see all the courses, public administration. We have started our classes also. And then geography, and then psychology. You also have agriculture, political science and international relations, history, sociology, mathematics, law, geology, geography. All those courses have were started in this month of February. So these are all the courses that you have. You have also Unacademy Ultra Combat. This examination will be your action plans to crack UPSC CSE 2022. You can win guaranteed scholarship and also exciting rewards. You have around 1,000 lucky participants who can win these rewards. It will be on 27th February 11 a.m. Alright, you can enroll now using our code PKS10. So these are all the courses that are offered on an academy platform. Let us move back to what we have to discuss this year's in a question paper. Yes, Amit, the classes are 7 days. We have classes 7 days a week. In fact, it will be 6 days a week. Sometimes it can be 7 days a week also. Right? So let us come back and look at the questions. As we know, this year public administration conference paper, it is not difficult. The focus is more on what we call concepts. UPSC is focusing more on conceptual clarity. And of course, most of the questions are what we call related to current events only. Even in paper 1 also, most of the questions are related to current events only. So let us look at all these the questions one by one, starting with the section A. Starting with section A. Answer the following questions in about 150 words. Governance is about managing self-organizing networks. So this is why why this question was asked, because this is what we say in the present age as far as governance is concerned. What we say here is that governance is all about taking decisions and implementing those decisions. That is what we say. Governance means taking decisions and implementing those decisions. So who will be taking decisions? We are living in this age of multi-actor paradigm, wherein multiple institutions are responsible for governance, and most of these institutions that are responsible for governance are in independent silos. They have their own selfish interest, vested interest. For example, NGOs, they have their own interest. Green NGOs are about protecting ecological systems. Private sector is about maximizing their profits. Media is about getting more sensational news for them. Bureaucracy is about retaining their power, and political executive is about winning elections. So all of them are working independently. So what you have to do is that you have to bring all of them together. You have to ensure that all of them are brought together, and you have to ensure that the decisions are made and implemented. This is where we talk about networking governance. This is where we talk about digital governance also. Get all the institutions at one place, ensure proper discussion and debate among themselves, and finally ensure that the decisions are made on the basis of what we call consensus. The same thing that we talk about in MP Foley also, integration. Whenever conflict is there, when so many self-organizing networks are there, automatically there can be scope for a lot of conflict between those networks. What you have to do is that you have to integrate their demands, their needs, and come up with a common policy so that the policies can be at the end of the day implemented in a more efficient manner. You can give the examples here. You can give the examples to explain these things. You can give the examples of right now the agrarian reforms that the government of India has brought. Since the government did not take into consideration the demands and needs of the farmers, there was so much of opposition. Had the government followed this networking governance approach, the government would have consulted all those actors involved there and would have come up with a reasonable policy that would have benefited all the sections of society. And as long as the governments follow strictly this colonial attitude towards governance, then governance would be a failure, especially when we are living in the age of multi-actor paradigm. That is what you have to write for this question. Next, two-dimensional taxonomy was used by Herbert Simon to describe the degree to which decisions are programmed and non-programmed. Explain. So again, as we say, these kind of questions, what do we say about these kind of questions? UPSC has to do some kind of creativity, because otherwise the question paper can become more what you call the question paper can become more routine and more predictable. That is the reason why they come out with these kind of questions. Please remember, the question is not difficult at all, except that it is somewhat different. Two-dimensional taxonomy was used by Herbert Simon. What we have to remember here is that Herbert Simon, was basically, you know, uh, an economist and also a mathematician. He was also known for using this artificial intelligence. So when he came out with his decision-making theory, his decision-making theory, we can say, is multidimensional in nature. He has used the knowledge of economics, mathematics, statistics, and computers to come up with his decision-making theory. That is where he had spoken about this two-dimensional taxonomy. So what Simon has said, that whenever the decisions are made in organizations, what he has said is that whenever the decisions are made in organizations, as we know, we have two different types of decisions, programmed and non-programmed decisions. So what is this? He said that programmed decisions are those decisions wherein the outcomes can be easily predicted, wherein we can easily know through a proper program, computer generated program, the outcomes. That is the way he called it, as programmed decisions, daily routine decisions wherein you can easily know the outcome. And non-programmed decisions means even this artificial intelligence and computers also will not be in a position to predict the outcomes. And it requires much more in-depth knowledge, and it will require much more analytical abilities on the part of the people. That is the reason why he said that these non-programmed decisions can be taken only by people at the top level who have a lot of experience, skills, and knowledge. And he said that over a period of time, due to developments in science and technology, due to developments in this artificial intelligence, even non-programmed decisions can be made programmed decisions. That means Even non-program decisions, wherein the strategic long-term decisions, their outcomes can be evaluated in a more accurate manner by using artificial intelligence computers. That is what Simon had said here. So Simon has said that organizations, if they have to maximize their efficiency, if organizations have to ensure that they are, they are, maximizing their efficiency, they are taking completely rational decisions. What they have to do is that they have to make sure that even non-program decisions are also converted into program decisions with the use of artificial intelligence, mathematics, and statistics. That is what Simon has said as part of this question. For example, when the finance minister presents a budget, she will try to take into consideration both known as well as unknown factors. Then they are fed into a computer. On the basis of that, the finance minister comes out with the budgetary estimates, wherein she is trying to convert the non-programmed into programmed decisions. That is what we have to write for this question. Then going to other questions, you can see the question. Examine the approach of a public service motivation as an inducement to bring the desired level of efficiency in public service delivery. So coming back here, what do we say here? You know, at the end of the day, public administration is all about taking decisions and implementing the decisions with the objective of maximizing welfare of people. And this objective of maximizing welfare of people is possible only when we can ensure efficient service delivery mechanisms. Especially in a developing country like India, as rightly pointed out by World Bank also, good governance is the key to achieve the objectives of development administration. It is the key to achieve the objectives of development administration. Why? Because the governments, both the central and state governments, are spending huge amounts of money on subsidies and other welfare programs. But the basic complaint is that outlays are not transformed into outputs because of various reasons. Definitely, one of them is bureaucracy inefficiency. So the question says that how we can use this public service motivation as an inducement. So how to make this bureaucracy efficient? How to make this bureaucracy efficient is what the question here. How to make this bureaucracy efficient? That is what the question that is here. How to make the bureaucracy efficient. And for this, what we have to remember here is that you know, you can motivate bureaucracy through various means, as we studied with these thinkers as part of public choice approach. Anthony Downs, he spoke about 5 different types of bureaucrats who get into services with different motivation levels. And what the question says here is that what the question says here is that how this public service motivation can be used as an inducement to how this approach can be used as an inducement to improve service delivery mechanisms. That is what the question says. So this is what we studied as part of Anthony Downs. The last category of civil servants we say is those who work for the people, who get into services for the sake of working for the people. And again, if you go back, to Frederick Herzberg, we said that motivation, can be more effective when it is internal in nature. That is the reason why, what we say is that the government should motivate. The government should motivate the people. The government should motivate these bureaucracy through what is called public service motivation. Through what is called public service motivation. That means the government can recognize the government can recognize the services of the bureaucrats. For example, we have the Prime Minister Excellence Awards, wherein those bureaucrats who would come out with those bureaucrats who would come out with innovations in service delivery mechanisms are suitably rewarded by the government. And we can also have a code of ethics so that we can motivate these bureaucrats to work for the country. As we studied with Chester Bernard also, we said that there are different kinds of motivation according to Chester Bernard. One of them is ideal benefactions. if you can create a sense of patriotism, nationalism among the bureaucracy, if you can create a sense of nationalism, then automatically the bureaucrats would automatically sacrifice their self-interest and work for the sake of the country. We need a proper code of ethics. That is what the question says. Then, so as you can see here, what we are doing here is that we are using the concepts of various thinkers, to explain these questions. That is what is required for you when writing answers in paper 1. You must be able to interlink the thinkers and the theories. Next, in theory, the civil society organizations promote cooperation between the people and public service organizations. But in activities, in practice, their activities restrict the promotion of government programs. Analyze. Again, a very good analytical question. So what we are saying here is that these civil society organizations had basically come into existence to ensure better coordination between the citizens and the government, right? Why they had come into existence? Because people had come together in a voluntary manner to protect themselves from exploitation by the government and private sector organizations. These civil society organizations are expected to promote public welfare. They are expected to create awareness among the people about their rights, and they are also expected to make sure that the governments are made accountable to the people. The basic problem in a representative democracy is that in our representative democracy, the basic issue here is that accountability of the government is over once the elections are over. For the next 5 years, we simply don't have any kind of accountability of the governments. And this is where civil society organizations can play a very important role by creating awareness among the people about their rights, so that citizens are also made aware about their rights, and they can make the governments make accountable for their performance. But in reality, what is happening is that, as the second part of the question says, their activities are restricted only to the promotion of government programs. If you look at the thousands and lakhs of NGOs that we have in our country, most of them are only performing one single task. That is, they are only implementing the government programs. All the flagship schemes of the government are implemented only with the help of the civil society organizations, NGOs. That is Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, whether it is midday meal scheme, whether it is health schemes. All other schemes are implemented only with the help of the civil society organizations, NGOs. Now, what is the problem here is that the problem here is that since they are getting funds from the government, since they are implementing the government schemes, these civil society organizations are not performing their basic function, that is to ensure accountability of the executive. Can you make a person accountable for his performance when you are working under that person? That is where the problem is. That is where the problem is. And that is the reason why these civil society organizations had become less effective. They have become nothing but an extension of the state in a country like India. After writing all these things, you have to talk about the solution also. What should be done? What needs to be done? You have to say that the civil society organizations must be in a position to generate revenues on their own, become financially independent, so that they don't have to depend on the government for their survival, and they can play a truly constructive role in ensuring what is called a citizen-centric governance. That is what you have to write for this question. Then let us go to the next question. Fayal and Taylor had different management perspectives. Fayal and Taylor had different management perspectives, but while having similar goal of organizational efficiency. Again, those who have attended our classes, we have discussed all these things in our class. We have separately discussed all these things also in our class. Both of them had their different managerial perspectives. They have similar goal of organizational efficiency. The objective of both Henry Fayal and Frederick Taylor is to maximize efficiency of organization, and they are only interested in maximizing the profits, because in private organizations efficiency maximization means profit maximization. But what they have done is they have explained organizational efficiency from different perspectives. What are the differences is what the question asks. And in fact, I had given the same question in our test series also, if those who have attended our test series before the main examination, right? So, when you look at Fayol, his administrative management theory is much more broader in perspective than Taylor's scientific management theory. Fayol's administrative management theory is applicable to both the public and private organizations, whereas scientific management theory is mostly for industrial organizations. Fayol's theory is applicable to both what we call, it is more focused on people at the top level management, whereas Taylor's scientific management theory is mostly at for people at the lower levels, what we call it as shop floor management. Fayol gave importance to functional aspects of organization. That is the reason he spoke about the 5 different functions to be performed by managers. He has spoken about the 5 different functions to be performed by managers, Henry Fayol. Whereas Taylor scientific management theory mostly talks about one best way of performing the task. Fayol has given importance to unity of command, whereas Taylor gave importance to multiplicity of command. And Taylor scientific management theory has spoken about what we call is this piece rate system, whereas Henry Fayol spoke about remuneration of the personnel. So these are all the differences between Fayol and Taylor, which ultimately made sure that both of them adopted different perspectives, but with the same objective. And how do we conclude? We conclude by saying that both Fayol and Taylor scientific theories are equally important for organizational management. Both of them are needed to maximize efficiency of organizations. That is what we write for this question. Then moving on to the next question. Behavioral approach has been questioned on the basis of its utility in the analysis of administrative problems. Discuss the weakness of the approach and the shifts made therein. This behavioral approach, to the study of public administration was started by Chester Bernard, and it was further developed by Herbert Simon. Simon adopted this behavioral approach for his decision-making theory. He had questioned the normative approach of the classical thinkers, wherein classical thinkers made assumptions about the behavior of people working in the organization. And what is the basic assumption made by the classical thinkers regarding the behavior of people working in the organization? Classical thinkers believed that human beings always behave in a rational manner. They made this assumption of rationality, and then on the basis of that assumption, they had come out with their theories. But what do we say in reality? In reality, we say that this rationality assumption is completely wrong, because you don't find that you don't find that people behaving in a rational manner. That is the reason why most of the classical theories are a failure, and that is where this behavioral approach was developed by Herbert Simon. And this behavioral approach is based on the concept of what we call empiricism. Empiricism. It is not. It is against the concept of normativism. It is based on the concept of empiricism. So instead of making unrealistic assumptions about the dynamics of human behavior and coming out with the theories, they say that we must come to any conclusion regarding the human behavior on the basis of what is actually happening. That is the reason why Simon had come out with this 3 different types of people in our nations on the basis of his observations regarding the people, the decisions taken by the people. He had spoken about this social man, then economic man, and administrative man. Social man cannot take completely rational decisions because his decisions are always motivated by the sentiments and emotions, whereas economic man only takes completely optimal decisions. Administrative man is capable but cannot completely because of various restrictions. Now, this behavioral approach was further developed by other thinkers, what we call post-behavioral thinkers. But what is the problem with all these thinkers? What is the problem with this behavioral approach? The basic issue with the behavioral approach is that this behavioral approach is mostly what is called descriptive in nature. We can only describe human behavior. We can only describe human behavior. We cannot prescribe human behavior. If you start prescribing human behavior, it automatically becomes classical theories. Classical thinkers prescribe human behavior, saying that human beings should always behave in a rational manner. For example, thinkers like Fredericks also adopted this behavioral approach for his theory of comparative public administration. And that is the reason why he is a comparative public administration. They could not come out with any theory. Is it possible to have a universal behavior by adopting a universal theory of public administration by adopting this comparative approach, wherein behavioralism is the basis? That's what we said. This behavioralism was the major strength as well as most important weakness of this classical of Frederick's. And that is the way in recent times it was realized that it is not possible to have those kind of grand universal theories by adopting behavioralist approach. And that is the reason why in recent times what we have seen is the emergence of what is called a middle range theories, wherein you are analyzing the dynamics of human behavior in similar patterns, similar systems, and coming out with the theories with to similar environments, similar ecological systems. That is what we say, and that is the reason why now another thing that we are doing in recent times is trying to analyze this behavior in a more accurate manner with the help of computers, artificial intelligence. And that is what you can see in the decision making theories also. We are talking about different models that have come into existence in recent times, wherein we are analyzing the dynamics of human behavior in a more rational, more accurate manner also. In public policy analysis also in recent times, we have accepted this behavioral approach. As economic survey recently pointed out, also last year's economic survey, the rationalist approach of the classical thinkers was a failure in public policies, and that is the reason why this behavioralist approach is also being followed nowadays. So this is what you have to write for this question. Next, public administration has been used as a socially embedded process of collective relationships, dialogues, and action, with the objective of human flourishment for all. The last part of the statement was not given. This is the definition given by the third Minot Conference for public administration. And that is why you can see the second part of the question. Examine the statement in light of the consensus achieved in the third Minot Conference. So the third Minot Conference has extensively discussed the nature and scope of the discipline of public administration. And it has said that public administration, it has hotly debated the issue related to whether public administration is an art or a science. Because since its inception, administrative thinkers always were having a lot of conflict among themselves, conflict of opinion among themselves, whether this discipline of public administration is an art or a science. And they have ultimately agreed that it is both art and science. More importantly, they have said that it does not really matter whether public administration is an art or a science. What is important is whether public administration is able to solve the problems faced by the people. This is what ultimately the objective of any academic discipline. And they also have tried to answer this question related to. They also have tried to answer this question related to the scope of the discipline of public administration. As all of us know, initially the scope of the discipline of public administration was restricted only to the executive branch of the government, which was given by thinkers like Herbert Simon and others. Later, this definition was rejected as they felt that it was too narrow, and they included legislature and executive also. Sorry, legislature and judiciary also. What we call it is much broader definition of the scope of the discipline of public administration. Then even then also it was found insufficient because of the fact that the scope of the discipline kept on expanding forever. Finally, it was decided that the scope of this public administration does not have any scope. That is when third Minot Conference had come out with a proper definition of public administration. It has said that public administration can be viewed as a socially embedded process of collective relationships, dialogues, and action with human flourishment for all. So the objective of public administration to maximize the welfare of people. How? It involves multiple actors in the development process, multi-actor paradigm. We have legislature, we have executive, we have judiciary, we have bureaucracy, we have media, we have NGOs, we have civil society organizations, we have community-based organizations, we have self-help groups, we have the private sector, we have multinational companies, we have multilateral institutions, and not last but not least, the people themselves. What it says is that All of them must come together. It is a socially embedded process of collective relationships. All of them must come together through networking governance. They must discuss, that is what is dialogue, and they must come out with the policies so that they can be implemented at the ground level and with the objective of human flourishment for all. With the objective of maximizing welfare of people. That is what the question says. And you can give the examples. If you remember, we have discussed similar question previously also. There I had given the examples also. As you can see here, for most of the questions, you are writing almost similar answers, if not the same. You are writing similar answers. Why? Because that is what the present status of the Discipline of Public Administration, wherein we are talking about collective relationships, integration, and collective implementation, what we call coalition of actors model in terms of implementation. And that is what you have to write. So, moving on, if you have any doubts, you can ask. If you have any doubts, you can ask, right? If you have any doubts, you can ask, right? Otherwise, let us move on. Moving on, a public-private partnership phenomena has been transformed into a type of governance scheme or mechanism. Discuss its capacity to overcome future challenges. So, what the question says here is that in 1991, when India had opted for this liberalization, privatization, and globalization, we have identified public-private partnership. We have identified public-private partnership as the most important mode of investment by the government through public-private partnerships, because we wanted to make best use of the strengths of both the government and the private sector, public sector and the private sector. The government has strengths in terms of enjoying credibility. The government has strength in terms of raising resources. It has sovereign ability to raise resources. The government has strength in terms of taking into consideration what we call negative outcomes of its actions, what we call it as negative externalities. The government has strength in terms of looking at a long-term development process. Private sector has strength in terms of maximizing the utilization of resources, in terms of optimizing the resources also, in terms of ensuring economy and efficiency. So it was believed that this public-private partnership is the best mode of investment in the age of liberalization, privatization, globalization. But in recent times, it has been transformed into a type of governance scheme or mechanism. So what happened in recent times is that this public-private partnership seems to be facing a lot of hurdles. It only resulted in what is called unholy nexus between the government and the private sector. As pointed out, it has also resulted in what is called a systematic corruption. This ultimately led to these public-private partnerships. Ultimately led to what we call ultimately led to crony capitalism. Also, the charges of crony capitalism, wherein it is said that in the name of public-private partnerships, what we are doing is we are giving away the precious resources of the country to private sector at throwaway prices. So what should be done to overcome the challenges of public-private partnerships? First and foremost, as we studied in our classes also, what we say here is that we must transform this public-private partnership. We must expand this public-private partnership into what? This public-private partnership will be expanded into public-private people panchayat partnership. 3P should be extended to 5P. We must include other stakeholders to overcome the challenge of a public-private partnership being converted into what is called crony capitalism, a tool for systematic corruption. We must include the stakeholders, people and panchayats, local self-governments also. Next, the government must properly, broadly define the objectives of public-private partnerships. It must clearly define objectives. These objectives must be defined in quantifiable manner. And the services to be provided by the private sector through public-private partnerships must be quantified. And these services must be decided in consultation with the stakeholders, the people who are supposed to benefit out of them. Then there must be proper accountability mechanism. Social audit of public-private partnership should be made mandatory. Economic and social impact assessment should be made, environmental and social impact assessment should be made mandatory for all these public-private partnerships. CAG should be allowed to conduct a performance audit of public-private partnerships. Unfortunately, in India, if you look at in recent times, in the name of public-private partnership, what we have done is that we have given all the major resources of the country to few private sector individuals, resulting in monopoly. Take the case of the ports. Maximum number of ports are controlled by one single family. The same is the case with airports. It is resulting in only monopoly. We must ensure competition in service delivery mechanisms. We must also make sure that these public-private partnerships would only benefit the people, not the businessmen, not result in what is called crony capitalism. There must be transparency, there must be participation, there must be accountability also. As suggested by various committees, in order to make these public-private partnerships more effective, we must also opt for hybrid annuity model. So that is what you have to write for this question. Proceeding further, let us proceed further to other questions. Let us go to the next question. Integration of different streams of administrative thought to propound a universal administrative theory is hindered by the impact of culture. Critically examine. Integration of different streams of administrative thought to propound a universal administrative theory is hindered by the impact of culture. So what we are talking about here is we are basically talking about the failure of Ricks to come out with a universal theory of public administration. Ricks was critical of classical thinkers because he felt that classical thinkers have failed because according to Ricks they have failed because these classical thinkers were ethnocentric in their approach. They had come out with their theory only for a specific country, specific cultural setup. They had come out with their theories for Western developed capitalistic industrialized societies. When they were implemented in other countries, they were a failure. For example, Max Weber's bureaucratic model of bureaucratic theory of our nation, which was considered universal by Weber, when it was implemented in countries like India, it was a failure. Why? Because in countries like India, Weberian bureaucracy can only think about ensuring stability and continuity, whereas the objective of bureaucracy in a country like India is to bring about changes. They simply neither had the attitude nor the aptitude to bring about those changes. That is when it was a failure. That is the reason why Ricks has said that he would take into consideration different cultures, different countries, different streams of administrative thought to come out with a universal theory. And that is what we said. He said that he would adopt a behavioralist approach, wherein he would observe the dynamics of human behavior through empiricism and then come out with a universal theory. But that is where the problem is. Behavioral thinkers could not come out with a theory at all. For example, Chester Bernard has said that acceptance should be the basis of authority. Let us assume that there are 25,000 people working in an organization. So all these 25,000 people, what we have to do is that we have to take into consideration their satisfaction and contribution equilibrium. Then only the decision can be implemented. Is it possible? Obviously not possible. When you cannot have a universal theory for 25,000 people, can you have a universal theory for 7 billion people? Obviously not. That is where the problem is. Why? Because in different countries around the world, you have different cultural settings, environmental settings. What is good for America may not be good for India. What is good for India may be bad for China. Every country has its own culture, has its own traditions, customs, ecological systems. Under these circumstances, it is almost impossible to formulate a universal theory of our nation. And that is where Riggs has failed. And that is the reason why we say that the biggest failure of Riggs lies in the fact that, forget about a universal theory, he could not even come out with a theory because behavioralism was the most important strength and the biggest weakness of Riggs, because the dynamics of human behavior changes according to the environment. So, what is good for bureaucracy in America may be completely bad for bureaucracy within India. Take the case of within India itself. In a bureaucracy which is successful in Kerala will be a failure in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Why? Because culture, everything. That is where it is impossible to have a universal theory. That is the reason why, as we discussed in the previous questions also, now the administrative thinkers are not looking for so-called grand theories. They have realized the fact that it is a waste of time to come up with these grand theories. That is the reason why what they have done is that they have come out with what is called middle range theories, wherein they look at the similar culture, similar traditions, similar customs, and come out with a theory which is applicable to all of them. That is what you have to write for this question. As you can see here, for most of the questions, we are almost repeating our answers. That is what you have to remember. Next, move on to the next question. Judicial review, prevention of misuse or abuse of administrative power, and provisions of suitable remedies are the basic principles of administrative law. Justify as how various organs of the state are able to uphold these principles. Judicial review, prevention of misuse of administrative power, and provision of suitable remedies. That is what we say. That is what we say: green light theory and red light theory of administrative law. As part of red light theory, we are accepting the fact that when the administrators are given powers, there is every possibility of them misusing those powers. And that is the reason why we talk about accountability mechanisms also. Now, coming back here, the question says that how various organs of state are able to uphold these principles like abuse of administrative power, provision of suitable remedies, prevention of misuse of powers, and judicial review. Unfortunately, what we say is that in a developing country like India, institutions are not very strong, wherein they are able to prevent misuse and abuse of administrative power. Take the case of institutions like CBI, NIA, CVC, Enforcement Directorate. All of them have got a huge amount of powers. All these institutions have got a huge amount of powers through what is called administrative laws. But unfortunately, we have not been able to make sure that these organizations, institutions are using their powers in a more constructive manner. As we can see in the case of the cases that are filed by CBI in the last few years, it was found that in almost 90% of the cases, CBI has filed cases against only political opponents of the ruling political party, wherein you can see a clear-cut misuse of power. Similarly, you can give the example of Army, this AFSPA, recently what happened in Nagaland. Till now, Army has not been able to fix accountability on the part of those people who were responsible for such gruesome crime committed by Army. Innocent people were killed on the basis of the suspicion that they were militants. So we don't have any what we call suitable remedial measures also. And then you can give the examples of police also. You can give the example of income tax. So what you can see is that in all these organizations, what you can see is that there is always a more a possibility of these organizations misusing their powers, but we don't have any suitable remedies. And take the case of Section 124A, which has been misused by almost every state government. Every state government, what they are doing is that they are regularly filing this Section 124A sedition laws against the political opponents. You criticize the chief minister, immediately the sedition laws are applied. And it was found out that the conviction rate is very, very low in this in the case of this sedition laws. It is less than 10%, clearly showing that there has been huge amount of misuse of power also. And judicial review also has not been that much successful. Why? Because Our judiciary is burdened with so many cases that it would take lakhs of people. According to a recent survey, 3.5 lakh people are spending their time, what we call under trials, are spending their time in jail because their cases are not coming up in front of our judiciary. Then you talk about the solutions. You have to talk about fixing accountability mechanisms, ensuring effective grievance redressal mechanisms, and improving the functioning of judiciary, making judiciary efficient, accountable, transparent, and responsive also, so that we can prevent the misuse of this administrative laws. Again, please remember all these questions you have to answer with relevant examples from current events. Moving on to the next question. Regulation is an old but increasingly necessary mode of social coordination and political intervention into societal process. Examine it in the context of globalization. So this is what we said in our classes. In the age of globalization, governance means regulation. In the age of globalization, governance means regulation. So what we are saying is that in this age of globalization, we are giving complete freedom to the private sector. We are giving freedom to the NGOs, civil society organizations, media, self-help groups, community-based organizations to do whatever they want, with the government only regulating their activities, not directly controlling their activities. This was not the case before 1991 when the government, when these organizations were not present at all. Even the private sector was there, the government controlled the private sector through through what we call LQP, License Quota Permit Raj. Now, in this age of globalization, we need this regulation. Why? Because globalization has many advantages, but at the same time, it also has many disadvantages also. It results in widening inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth, and it also results in exploitation of environment. It also results in increasing social tensions because of jobless growth. It also results in conflict between various sections of society to have control over resources, because resources are limited in supply. That is where regulation is very important. It is a mode of social coordination and political intervention. Why? Because this regulation is needed to protect the people from the forces of globalization, to protect small scale industries, to protect small producers, to protect consumers, to protect poorer sections of society, weaker sections of society. That is where we talk about the regulatory authorities. That is why we talk about in the age of globalization, governance means regulation. For example, 2008 financial crisis in America took place because of the failure of regulatory authorities. They could not prevent the collapse of markets. In India also, the regulatory authorities' failure has resulted in massive levels of corruption also. And that is the reason why we need proper regulatory mechanisms which ensures transparency, accountability, and responsiveness. That is what you have to write for this question. Right. Let us move on to the next question. The new public service model approaches governance on the premise of an active and involved citizenship, wherein the role of public officials is to facilitate opportunities for citizen engagement in governance. These kind of questions, the answer is always there in the question itself. For these kind of questions, answer is always there in the question itself. So, what is NPS approach to in a public administration? What is NPS approach? This NPS approach has come into existence because of the failure of a traditional approach of public administration. What is state-centric development? It has also come into existence because of the failure of NPM, that is market-based approach. Market-based approach to what we call development. This NPS had come into existence because of these things, because of these things. So what is this NPS approach to development? As part of NPS approach to development, as part of NPS approach to governance, what we are saying here is that the government is not treating people either as subjects to be governed. That was in state-centric development. People were treated as subjects to be governed. Now the government will be treating people as customers to be served. That is part of what we call NPM. The government is not treating people either as subjects or customers, Then how will the government treating the people? They will be treated people as citizens. That is what you can see also here. The government will be treating people as citizens, wherein the government gives importance to democratic choices, wherein the government gives importance to participation, wherein the government gives importance to responsiveness, wherein the government gives importance to efficiency and economy, wherein the government gives importance to inclusiveness and equity, wherein the government gives importance to in a multi-actor paradigm, wherein the government gives importance to democratic choices of citizens. And that is the reason why we talk about what is called a multi-actor paradigm to governance. Multi-actor paradigm to governance, wherein the vertical structures of governance are replaced with horizontal structures, where everyone is equal. You have the central government, you have the state government, you have local self-governments, you have bureaucracy, you have NGOs, you have civil society organizations, you have media, you have private sector, you have residents welfare associations, you have self-help groups, you have community-based organizations. All of them come together, and the government involves citizens actively, decentralized, participative, accountable, and efficient governance. That is what we say about new public service approach to governance, wherein the bureaucrats must have both the efficiency and also give importance to equity and inclusiveness, wherein they must be treating people as citizens, not as subjects nor as customers. If you are treating people as customers, it means that you are completely ignoring vast sections of poor people who do not come under the forces of market. That is, you might treat them as citizens, give importance to their democratic choices, involve with them in policy formulation, implementation, and evaluation, move towards citizen-centric governance. That is what you have to write for this question. You can give a lot of examples for all these things. You can give the example of these Gram Sabhas. You can give the example of Syrian charters. You can give the example of social audits. You can give the example of public-private people panchayat partnerships. You can give the example of a coalition of actors model in terms of implementation. All these things you have to write for this question. Next, neo-Weberian state involves changing the model of operation of administrative structures into a model focused on meeting citizens' needs. Please remember, the answer to the question will be similar to the one that we have discussed earlier. Neo-Weberian state. What do you mean by neo-Weberian state? New Weberian state. What is this new Weberian state? Let us try to understand this one. Between 1950s and 1990s, all over the world, it was the bureaucracy-centric development. Bureaucracy had monopoly, and especially in India, bureaucracy had absolute monopoly, and they followed what is called the Weberian model, giving importance to rules and regulations, secrecy, hierarchy, written communication, specialization, so on and so forth. But that was a failure. Then what happened? We have moved towards what is called NPM state, wherein bureaucracy was asked to work in a highly competitive environment. Public sector enterprises were asked to face competition, either perform or perish, wherein they were asked to give more importance to economy and efficiency than equity or inclusiveness, wherein they were asked to treat people as customers to be served, with emphasis on cost-benefit analysis. When this was a failure, again we are talking about this neo-Weberian state, wherein the failure of NPM has forced again to bring back the state into the center of economic and developmental activities. But this bringing in this state, this neo-Weberian state is different from the old one. In the old one, bureaucracy had absolute monopoly. Now they are, they are expected to follow this multi-actor paradigm to governance. So in the old one, they gave importance to administrative structures, they gave importance to rules and regulations, they gave importance to hierarchy, they gave importance to written communication, they gave importance to secrecy, and ultimately it resulted in what we call ultimately it resulted in goal displacement. That is the reason why now neo-Weberian state says that its focus is completely different. How to involve citizens in governance to ensure transparency and accountability, to ensure consensus in decision making, and also to ensure accountability in terms of outcomes rather than rules and regulations. To ensure what is called responsive state, adopt ecological approach. That is what the question is. As I said, you can see here for almost all these questions, the answer will be the same. Then come to the next question here. Nothing in public administration is more important, interesting, or mysterious than leadership. Analyze the statement in the context of strategic leadership. So, why this statement was made? Of course, because of the fact that it is the leadership that determines the functioning of our nations. You take any our nation, at the end of the day, the organizational success does not depend on the people or the structures or the principles or anything else. It depends on the quality of leadership. It is the leader who can make an inefficient organization efficient, and vice versa also. That is the reason why it is always very interesting. Take the case of freedom movement in India. If you have to talk about the freedom movement in India, we can talk about in two phases: before Gandhi and after Gandhi. You can see how a charismatic strategic leadership like Mahatma Gandhi had completely transformed the freedom movement in India. Before that, it was restricted to only few microscopic minority sections of society, educated middle class Indians, mostly from Bengal and Maharashtra. Gandhi made it a mass movement, involved ordinary people, and had broken the intellectual barriers and made it a past popular mass movement. That is where we talk about leadership. And strategic leadership, this is very important. Strategic leadership means, wherein the leadership focuses on long-term and sustainable growth of our nation in the long term also. Rather than pandering to the populistic demands of the people, the leader, what the leader will be doing is, leader will be focusing on the long-term consequences and outcomes. And you can give the examples here. You can give the examples of strategic leadership, especially in private organizations. You can see that, especially in private organizations, you can see that nowadays they are looking at long-term strategic growth and development of our nations. Why? Because what the 2008 financial crisis have proved is that if you are looking at immediate short-term benefits, it can result in the collapse of our nations also. That is the reason why we're talking about strategic leadership. Even in the case of countries also, you can see that all the countries right now are talking about sustainable development and long-term inclusive growth. And this is where the load of leadership becomes very, very important. Especially in politics, the basic problem with the democracy is that the leadership is only concerned about immediate short-term goals in the form of subsidies so that they can win elections. And this is where you can talk about the present this year's budget also. This year's budget has resisted all the temptations of becoming populistic in nature and focused more on what we call long-term sustainable development. That is where you talk about the strategic leadership of the country. The finance minister or the prime minister could have taken the easiest route of increasing the subsidies and becoming more popular. They did not opt for this. On the other hand, they have reduced these petroleum subsidies, food subsidies, and they wanted to use that money to finance capital expenditure. That is when leadership becomes crucial for any country. So this is what you have to write for this question also. This is what you have to write. Let us move on to section B, the fifth question. Section B. Here you have to answer 5 questions. You have to answer 5 questions, and then here there is no choice. You have to answer all of them. Each question carries 10 marks, and you have to answer them in around 150 words. The approach to the study of administration in its environmental context is especially more useful for developing countries. Comment. It is especially more useful for developing countries. Please remember, we have discussed these kind of questions in the previously also. Please remember we have discussed this kind of questions in the previous questions also. As I said, for most of the questions, the answer will be the same only. So what we are saying here is that, the question says, classical thinkers, what they have done, classical thinkers have, have completely ignored environment. They have adopted closed systems approach, and that is the reason why they are a failure. And when we have to study administration, we have to take into consideration the environment, ecology. This is more useful, especially for developing countries. Why? Because as we studied, you know, why most of the developing countries have failed in their development administration, because they have transplanted all those structures of the Western countries in their own country without, without changing or without giving importance to the without giving importance to the environment. For example, take the case of Weberian bureaucracy in India. Why Weberian bureaucracy in India is a failure? Because it did not take into consideration the environment. Weberian bureaucracy in Western countries was successful because of the fact that the environmental conditions were conducive for the success of Weberian bureaucracy. Take the case of Syrian charters. Take the case of social audits. Take the case of public-private partnerships. So why all of them had become successful in those countries, e-governance? Because of the environment under which they operate. Their people are aware about their rights. They are educated. Their political culture is based on cognitions, wherein bureaucracy consider themselves to be what we call true servants of the people. That kind of environment does not present is not present in developing countries like India. That is the reason why what we have to say, what we say is that grafting is better than transplantation. We must create the necessary conditions in developing countries so that we can ensure that these radical reforms can be successful in India. That is where we have to study the environment. Take case of there's a form agrarian reforms that the bill that the government had introduced. As our Prime Minister rightly pointed out, they have introduced the bill to benefit the farmers. They had withdrawn for the sake of the country. Why? Because the farmers they were not they could not understand the benefits of the reforms. There is so much of apprehension. They were going on agitations, and Punjab is a border state. That is where environment becomes very important. If you don't take into consideration environment, automatically you will be a failure. And that is where you must take into consideration ecological factors, especially for developing countries. So that is what you have to write for this question. Then moving on, gender equality and women's rights have laid down a strong foundation of development. Elaborate. As we said, in a development administration in a developing countries has not been as successful as it should have been because of the fact that 50% of the population, women, do not participate in development. In India, 47.5% of our population are women, 48% you can say. But we don't have an environment wherein women can go out and participate in the development process. They don't have proper education, health, security. These things were not there. But in recent times, what we have witnessed is more active participation of women in the development process, thanks to one is gender equality movements and also women rights movements. So, especially from 1990s onwards, with the spread of liberalization, privatization, globalization, what we have witnessed is active participation of women in development process, especially in the private sector. Active part, and also we have seen in villages, we have seen self-help groups wherein women are coming together uh, to benefit themselves. And what all of them have done is that they have laid down a strong foundation of development. Earlier, development was completely lopsided with the private sector and the government completely ignoring women. Now, the gender related issues cannot escape the minds of policymakers when they come out with developmental plans. But in spite of the fact that This women rights and gender equality have become have laid a very strong foundation of development. Still, a lot needs to be done, and that is what you have to write here. What needs to be done? What must be done? What must be done here is that we must make sure that uh, opportunities are provided, environment is created to ensure that they will they will be in a position to develop themselves on their own. What is needed on the part of the government and the society? First and foremost, you have to ensure the safety and security of women, both inside and outside. When they go out to work, you must ensure their safety and security. Because in countries like India, what we are witnessing is huge amount of atrocities committed on women, sexual exploitation. So you must ensure safety and security of women. Second, girl education should be given top priority by the government, because still, if you look at the big states like UP and Bihar, the gender indices are not really great. Education. Third one is you have to give importance to their health also, health related issues. Fourth, you must break the glass ceiling that exists in the private sector at the top level. We have very few women CEOs. We must break this glass ceiling. Fifth, we must also ensure equal opportunities for women in politics also. Even the women constitute around 48-49% of our population. Their representation in parliament is only 10-12%. So what is required is 33% reservations for women in parliament also. We need reservations for women in public services. This is what we have to write for this question. Next, moving forward, performance appraisal needs to be seen beyond mere suitability of the official for vertical promotion. That is what the question says, and this is what we studied in our classes also. When we talk about performance appraisal, the basic issue with performance appraisal in a country like India is that this performance appraisal is restricted only to promotion and increment in salaries, and that is where it has been problematic for a country like India. Why? Because we are looking at performance of the civil servant bureaucracy through the prism of only one thing, whether they are suitable for promotion to higher level positions. But that is not the end of performance appraisal. What is it required? This is where you can bring in so many thinkers. This performance appraisal can be used to ensure that these officers are posted in those positions where they have what we call ability, attitude, and aptitude for that particular job. This is where we talk about Frederick Herzberg two-factor theory, wherein he speaks about vertical job loading, job enrichment. Performance appraisal should be to ensure job enrichment. It should be done to see what are the strengths and weaknesses of the officials, and it should be making sure that they maximize their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. To maximize their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. For example, you have a bureaucrat who can work very well in, say, tribal welfare ministries, because he has aptitude for the problems of tribals. He comes from those places. And if you are posting them in finance ministry, obviously he will be a failure. As Einstein says, you cannot judge a bird in terms of its ability to run on the ground. Similarly, you cannot judge a horse in terms of its ability to fly in the sky. And that is where this performance appraisal becomes very important. What we require is 360-degree performance evaluation to see the suitability of the person for the job, to know his strengths and weaknesses, to recruit to appoint him to those positions where he has the what we call attitude as well as aptitude. And performance appraisal should go beyond individual performance. He should look at group performance and also the performance in terms of organizational objectives. And the performance appraisal, as we say, is 360-degree performance. It should be done in terms of through the prism of stakeholders also. If you are evaluating the performance of a medical officer, district medical officer, let the people of the area also evaluate his performance, what we call social audits. All this should be done so that ultimately this 360-degree performance evaluation can help the organization to retain good people, remove remove inefficient people, and also appoint people to those positions where they have the abilities and more importantly attitude also. That is how, unfortunately, in India, this performance appraisal is a failure because it is only restricted to what is called one thing, that is increment in salary and promoting to higher level positions. Beyond that, nothing else. Then moving forward to the next question, it is widely agreed that the government ought to provide the goods that the market fails to provide or does not provide efficiently. Argue. Again, these kind of questions we have given in our test series also. Similar questions we have given in our test series. So this is regarding the state versus market debates, and what is the role of the state in the age of globalization. So what we are saying here is that markets provide goods and services, only those goods and services which are demanded by people, which are not necessary for people. Please remember two things here. What is necessary for people will not be produced by the markets. What is demanded by the people will be produced by the markets. For example, poor people require food. Market does not provide them. Why? Because they cannot pay for them. On the other hand, rich people want luxurious cars. That is the reason why markets will provide luxurious cars, because there is demand for them. So what happens with the functioning of markets is that there will be distortion of production processes. There will be diversion of goods and services. There will be diversion of resources. That is where the government has to step in and provide those goods which are not provided by the market, or where the market cannot provide them efficiently. For example, take the case of education and health, especially in rural areas. Markets will not go, private sector will not go to rural areas because people don't have money. That is the reason why you have find all the super specialty hospitals are only in big cities, run by the private sector. In rural areas, you don't find those things. You can see this absence of basic goods recently in the corona crisis. The last 2 years of corona crisis had spoken about eloquently, very efficiently about the failure of the government to provide basic goods that were needed by the people at the ground level. Because in the rural areas, in all those rural areas, what we can see is that in rural areas, we don't have the private sector era, we don't have the private sector providing these services to the people, especially health services. That is the reason why in states like UP and Bihar, there were so many corona deaths which were not even recorded also. People did not even know that they were dying because of corona, because there were not many testing centers also. And it was found out in UP that people had to walk for at least 20 kilometers from their home place to reach to their nearest primary healthcare centers, unfortunately, which are not there. That is where we say the problem with the private sector. They don't go there simply, and that is where we need government. Similarly, take the case of disaster management. Private sector is only looking at only profits. They are not at all concerned about disaster management. That is where the government has to step in and do all those things. Food, private sector will not provide. The government has to go and provide food. Roads, drinking water. These are all the public goods which have to be provided by the government only, because the private sector will not do all those things. That is what the question says. And that is the reason why we say that government ought to provide those goods that market fails to provide or does not provide efficiently. That is the role of the state in the age of liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Moving on to the next question. MIS has evolved and gone far beyond its traditional advantages due to technological advancements. Comment. As we say, MIS, Management Information Systems, it basically has come into existence to computerize the data and also to provide accurate information to the policymakers so that they can take completely rational decisions. Now, the question says that it has gone beyond its traditional advantages and due to technological advancements. Now, MIS is being used by public organizations for various purposes. For example, MIS is being used by the government. For example, recently Economic Survey also has spoken about the digital maps. That is why what we talk about MIS, wherein you will come to know about the resources accurately through those geographical positioning GPS systems. And you are talking about taking completely rational decisions because of the fact that you have adequate information about what is happening at the ground level, so that they can take completely rational decisions. Now you are also talking about having this what is called SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and strengths, opportunities and threats. The decision making models, the contemporary decision making models. We are talking about pestle analysis. For all these things, what the governments are doing is they are using MIS for all these things. And that is the reason why both the decision making, decision implementation, and decision evaluation has become much more dynamic, much more rational, much more efficient with the help of management information systems. Give the best examples here. Take the case of NREGA. NREGA was full of leaks, was full of corruption. Now, thanks to MIS, thanks to use of technology, thanks to DBT, what we can see is that we are able to prevent the leaks by ensuring effective implementation. We also know, take the case of PM Kisan. Through PM Kisan, the government is able to transfer thousands of crores of rupees into the accounts of lakhs and millions of farmers also. And this is possible with the help of MIS. Similarly, take other flagship schemes of the government, whether it is Food Security Act or anything else. All of them had become more efficient, more effective thanks to MIS, thanks to the technological advancement that we have achieved through MIS. We are able to make sure that through this DBT, direct benefit transfers, through Jan Dhan Aadhaar and mobile job, we are able to make sure that people come to know about the benefits. They come to know about the benefits on a real-time basis with the help of this MIS. And that is what we have to write for this question. Then moving on to the next question. Moving on to the next question. Emphasis on cost control and reducing public expenditure has diverted the focus of government budgets from the basic objectives of reallocation of resources, bringing economic stability and promoting social equity. Examine. Incidentally, we have given the same question in our test series also this year. We have given the same question in our test series also this year. Now, especially after the adopting this NPM, especially after adopting NPM, right? What we have done is that we have focused only on controlling fiscal deficit, reducing expenditure, and focusing on what we call business-like approach to governance. And in the process, we have completely ignored. The basic objective of a budget. The basic objective of a budget is to what we call allocate resources. The basic objective of a budget is to ensure inclusive growth. The basic objective of a budget is to ensure economic stability. The basic objective of the budget is to promote social equity. And that is where we have seen rapid radical changes, especially from 1991 onwards, wherein we have completely moved away from these traditional aspects of budgeting. We have completely moved away from traditional aspects of budgeting. That is the reason why, especially in countries like United States of America, they have abandoned NPM state. and they are focusing on what is called a judicial era of governance, wherein you are bringing back the state with much vigor. That is what even the President of America nowadays says. He says that Joe Biden, that he was extremely thankful to the private sector for the kind of contributions that they have done to the country. Now he says that now it is time for the government to step in, and the government to take back control of the economy, control of the society, control of the people with the help of budgets. That is the reason why World Bank and IMF, which have strongly spoken about reducing the fiscal deficits and reducing the expenditure, have now changed their tunes, and they are talking about the government spending more without worrying about the deficits. In India also, that is what we are seeing now. If you look at last year, the fiscal deficit was 9.5% of our GDP. The government says that we are not bothered, because for us, the most important thing is coming to the rescue of the people who are affected by this corona pandemic. We must ensure economic stability. We must ensure that allocations of resources are done in such a manner to benefit the poorest sections of society. And we must also ensure that social equity is achieved. That is the reason why the government of India, through the budget, what they have done in the last 2 years of the corona pandemic, 80 crore people were given 80 crore people were given free food grains. In the present UP elections also, if you happen to see the electioneering, the ruling political party says that they have made sure that not even a single person would die of hunger during this corona crisis through this food security. That is where we talk about the role of the state also. That is the reason why the government has said that they do not mind spending more amount of money on subsidies, do not mind spending more amount of money on the welfare of weaker sections of society, and they do not find more spending more amount of money on ensuring economic stability also. Because if you look at this year's budget, you have to answer all these questions only with relevant examples. In this year's budget, compared to last year, we have seen more than 30% increase in the capital expenditure of the government also, because that is needed to uh, revitalize private sector investment also in the age of this recession. Private sector is not willing to invest because of the fact that there is no demand. Through government investment, there will be more multiplier effect, and it can revive the economic activities also. And more importantly, the government is using the budget to reallocate resources in favor of what we call capital expenditure, so that it can result in, if you take it last year budget, the government has increased the amount of spending on health sector to 2,35,000 crores. That is what we say reallocation of resources. You have to write all these things for this question. Then proceeding further, in modern context, Rixian terms have not altogether disappeared, but have emerged in different forms with newer meanings. So the question says that Rix had come out with his this prismatic model, and he had come out with differentiation, integration, development. Uh, he had come out with descriptive values, achievement norms, everything else. What the question says is that in the modern context, in the present day context, these terms have not disappeared, but they have emerged in different forms with newer meanings. That is what we say also. If you look at Rixian differentiation and integration, they have been used nowadays in this age of globalization. How do we say that? In the age of globalization, we say that governance means regulation. We say that specialization is given more importance. Specialists should be reaching top level positions in organizations, which is nothing but Rick's concept of differentiation, high levels of differentiation. Rick's defined development as a process of increasing autonomy of social systems made possible by raising levels of diffraction, that is by raising levels of differentiation and integration. Rick's becomes important. 2008 financial crisis in America has taken place. Again, we can explain that with the help of Rick's, because America is also a prismatic society. That is what we say. America is also a prismatic society wherein you can see that they have high levels of differentiation in the form of multiple regulatory authorities, independent regulatory authorities. In 1980, America had 12 independent regulatory authorities. By 2008, it had more than 120 independent regulatory authorities, showing high levels of differentiation. But why did this financial crisis take place? This financial crisis had taken place the fact that because of the fact that there was no integration. There was no coordination among all these regulatory authorities. Nothing but risks only here. That is the reason why, in order to ensure integration, American president had come out with this idea of a super regulator. Again, risks comes into picture. Formalism, that is what we see in all the countries around the world nowadays, where it is America also. Why do we call America a prismatic society? Because America has formalism. Because there is so much of deviation from the concept of rule of law in America also. Because in America also there is discrimination of people in the name of religion. We have heterogeneity. We have polyfunctionalism, polynormativism, polycommunalism, corruption. All these terms were used by Ricks in a different context, but all of them had become very important in the present day context also. Ricks has spoken about development administration and administrative development, which is very relevant for India nowadays. Why we are not able to achieve the objectives of development administration? Because we don't have administrative development. That is what you have to write for this question. As I said, for all these kind of questions, what we have to remember is that you must be in a position to interlink the questions. You must be in a position to interlink the question, the concept with the current events. Concept with current events. That is where your ability lies. Right? That is what you have to write for this question. Moving on, let us move on to the next question. Let us move on to the next question. The next question here is that a striking feature of economic development is an apparent symbiotic evaluation of strong states and strong market economies. Analyze. Again, incidentally, I have given the same question in our test series also. Ultimately, in development administration, at this point of time, what we talk about is a strong state and strong markets. There was this debate about strong state versus market, thinking that both of them are antagonistic in nature. And it was believed that a strong state will always be accompanied with weak markets, so on and so forth. But that is not the case. At this point of time, what we are talking about all around the world is having strong and powerful states with strong markets, also private sector. Both of them are equally needed. Why do we say that? Why do we say that we need both strong state and strong markets? These strong markets, what they ensure is that they will ensure better competition for service delivery mechanisms. They will prevent monopolies. They will protect the interests of the private sector. They will protect the interests of the consumers. And they will ensure optimal utilization of resources. Strong markets. We need strong and powerful markets. Whereas a strong state is also needed to prevent the collapse of markets, to ensure what is called a sustainable development, to ensure inclusive and equitable growth, to protect the interests of weaker sections of society, to promote the interests of those who do not come under the forces of market, and also to prevent the negative externalities of development process. And that is the reason why we say that we need a strong state and strong markets. A strong state with emphasis on better regulation rather than control, with emphasis on better supervision rather than physical what we call rules and regulations, can act as what we call a predominant force to ensure rapid economic growth and development of the country. Because a strong state, however powerful it might be, will not be in a position to fulfill all the needs of the people, as can be seen in the case of countries like Russia. That is the reason why China, if you look at it, China is the best example of a strong state and strong market economies. Even though China is not a democratic country, but still it has made sure that it has what is called state-led capitalism. China is not a completely communist country, it is a state-led capitalism. Private sector was given more freedom. It has ensured strong and vibrant private sector, but it will be working under the state. But we are not talking about China here. We are talking about democratic countries like India, wherein we need a strong state and a strong market economies also. That is what you have to write for this question. So let us move on to the next question. Let us move on to the next question. Policy problems are increasingly tending towards being weak. Discuss the capacity and preparedness of the state to tackle such problems. Again, if you look at these kind of questions, all the questions are only analytical in nature. If you have basic knowledge of conceptual knowledge of public administration, you can answer all those questions. That is what you have to remember. What is required is basic, simple knowledge of public policy analysis. So the question says that policy problems are increasingly tending to being weak. What do you mean by that? At this point of time, we cannot have these public policies being seen through the prism of white and black. That is what we have seen a similar question in our ethics paper also. If all the papers, if we have seen similar question in the ethics paper also, that is what Abraham Lincoln's statement also says. He says that we cannot, whenever the government is taking decisions, you cannot have a situation wherein the government will be taking decisions in terms of black and white, what is good and what is bad. What we find is that when we talk about the government decisions, the decisions of the government, policies of the government always fall in this gray area, wherein it will benefit some, it will not be, it will not be benefiting some other people also. That is where you have to take the decisions. That is where public policy analysis becomes much more complicated. Now, discuss the capacity and preparations of the state to tackle such problems. Whether the state has the capacity to tackle those problems. Let us try to give some examples for it. Take the case of economic growth versus sustainable development. What is the problem here in economic growth versus sustainable development? Whenever the government is coming out with a policy, it must ensure rapid economic growth because that is the only way to reduce poverty. But the question here is that to ensure this rapid economic growth, we must make sure that the government is using all the available natural resources like forest, like mineral resources, like like water and everything else. Now, what the problem here is that if you are utilizing those resources, automatically it results in degradation, environmental degradation. So, what should the government do? If you don't utilize, it will result to, it will lead to more poverty. If you utilize them, it will result in environmental degradation. As I said, there is nothing like what is called black and white here, right? Now, what the state has to do is that it has to minimize the impact of environmental degradation and maximize the benefits. So, what it must do is that whatever the economic growth that is taking place, it must make sure that that economic growth is inclusive and sustainable and equitable in nature. On the other hand, in a country like India, what is happening is that in the name of economic growth, what is happening is, you know, the resources of the country are given to the private sector, and it is resulting in more riches for the private sector. That is the reason why you can see that in the last 2 years of Corona crisis, 84% of our population had their incomes drastically reduced, whereas the top 100 billionaires in India have seen huge amount of increase in their wealth also. That is why do we have the capacity to tackle such problems? Unfortunately, we don't have the capacity. We don't have the capacity. Is the state prepared to tackle such problems? Again, we are not prepared. Take the case of Corona crisis also. State simply is not prepared to tackle issues like Corona. Health infrastructure is completely absent. Both the central and state governments have completely ignored this health infrastructure since independence. As we say, since independence, two important sectors were totally ignored by the state: education and health. Then, after writing all these things, as usual, you have to come up with the solutions. What should be done also? what should be done is that you have to increase the capacity of the state to tackle these issues. How? You need the bureaucracy to go beyond the traditional modes of governance. You need the political executive to look beyond the immediate short-term benefits. You can see that what is happening in India in almost every state, political populism is dominating. Every state government is borrowing heavily to finance subsidies. For how long? They are not concerned because for them, the most important thing is to win elections. That is the reason why we must make sure that public policies are oriented towards the people. They satisfy the long-term sustainable development needs of the people, not immediate short-term benefits. And that is where we require transparency, accountability, and participation of citizens in public policies. We must move towards decentralized participative governance so that policy problems reflect the real needs of the people at the ground level so that we can come up with solutions through integration. As you can see, we are talking about multi-actor paradigm only here to tackle these kind of questions. So this is what, yes, arsenal, definitely. That is what you need in a proactive, dynamic, accountable, efficient, transparent governance. We are talking about only what we call good governance only. We are talking about only good governance here. Right? Yes. Zero-based budgeting was intended to get away from the incrementalism, but it, uh, it ended up being the most incremental of any budgetary approach discussed. Again, this question we have given in our test series also. So, what is the problem with zero-based budgeting? Zero-based budgeting had come into existence in the United States of America in 1977 because of the failure of the previous budgets to control the fiscal deficits of the government. From line item budget to management by objectives, all those budgeting systems followed only one same principle, that is incrementalism. That is, the present day budget allocations are nothing but an increment from the previous year budgets. In line item budget, these increments are automatic without it being linked to performance, whereas in other budgeting systems, these increments are linked to the performance during the past year. Otherwise, this incrementalism was followed. America was facing serious economic crisis. So, by late 1970s, American economy was almost about to collapse. The fiscal deficit was very high. Public sector enterprises were a failure. And the government was spending huge amounts of money on welfareism. Hundreds of policies were implemented. That is the reason why, in order to control their deficits, the government had come out with what is called this zero-based budgeting, wherein the budgetary allocations would start from a base of zero. And the government thought that it would completely result in a drastic reduction in the fiscal deficits. But it did not happen. Why? Because as we study, these budgetary reforms can be successful only when there is political commitment. Unfortunately, for implementation of zero-based budgeting, there was neither a political commitment nor bureaucratic sincerity. So when it comes to question of applying sunset legislation to various developmental schemes and programs, what the bureaucracy has done, they have strongly opposed application of sunset legislation. They have opted for drastic reduction in allocations, but not for sunset legislation. And what we have to remember here is that in budgets, monies are allocated not on the basis of programs, but on the basis of policies. And these policies are determined by the political executive. At the end of the day, budget is nothing but a political instrument. And that is the reason why zero-based budgeting was a complete failure. And it ended up as being the most incremental of any budgetary approach. And that is the reason why by 1980, zero-based budgeting was abandoned in the United States of America and was replaced with target-based budgeting that was introduced by Ronald Reagan, wherein it is called budgeting from above, wherein the president would fix the expenditure limits of the ministries and departments, rather than the budgetary demand for grants being prepared by ministries and departments on their own. That is what you have to write for this question. Why? Because all these budgetary reforms are a failure. Why? Because budgetary reforms can be successful only when there is political commitment. For example, give the example here of India this year. The government has said that they wanted to reduce the fiscal deficits and revenue deficits. The Prime Minister has said that his most important objective is to control the deficits. That is the reason why you can see in this year's budget, if you look at it in this year's budget, you can see that the government has reduced the subsidies, fertilizer subsidies, food subsidies, as well as petrol subsidies also. What is required is political commitment. Otherwise, these budgetary reforms will be a failure. Then proceeding further to the next question, ICT, information and communication technologies has immense potential to transform governance and empower citizens. Examine. That is what we say, ICT, information and communication technologies. E-governance is not only about providing service delivery, improving service delivery mechanisms, it is about transforming governance. How? What do we mean by transforming governance? Transforming governance from bureaucracy-centric governance to citizen-centric governance, from centralization to decentralization, from colonial attitudes to democratic participation, from secrecy to transparency, from moral responsibility to legal accountability, from treating people as subjects to be governed to treating them as citizens to be empowered, from complete absence of accountability mechanisms to ensuring effective grievance redressal and accountability mechanisms, from rule orientation to outcome orientation, from closed systems approach to ecological approach. All these things you have to write here for this question. How this e-governance, digital governance, ICT can be used to transform our governance with the objective of empowering citizens. And you can give lots of examples here. You can give lots of examples here. How DBT has transformed, how this RTA, how citizen charters, how social audits. But after writing all these things, you say that India needs to implement more reforms to make sure that these information communication technologies can be used in a more efficient manner to empower citizens. You say that multidimensional reforms are needed. Give the example of judiciary. Give the example of police. Give the example of Prime Minister has spoken about national digital health mission. All these reforms you can give examples, right? So that is what you have to write for this question. Proceeding further, let us move on to the next question. The last question of this paper, 8th question. As you can see, we are completing the entire discussion of paper in 2 hours, right? The successful attainment of SDG objectives largely depend on the wisdom, experience and foresightedness of the actors involved and their willingness to cooperate in the implementation process. Analyze. So we have identified 17 goals of SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. They are related to removing poverty, education, drinking water, health, and providing basic infrastructure to the citizens, and also related to sustainable development. So again, as you can see here, the answer to almost all the questions that we are writing here is almost similar, if not the same. So what we are saying is that achieving the objectives of sustainable development goals, right, is not the exclusive responsibility of the state or bureaucracy. It involves all the actors, as we say, multi-actor paradigm. Why? Take the case of private sector. The objective of private sector is to maximize their profits. It is not at all concerned about anything else. So what happens here? They would be ruthlessly exploiting the ecological systems, environment. It can result in environment degradation. We are not able to achieve sustainable development goals. Take the case of people here. the most important actors in the whole process. People are looking for all the time only subsidies. Take the example of farmers community here. Farmers in our country at this point of time, you can see that farmers are strongly opposing to fixing meters to their motors that are used for groundwater. They are strongly opposed. What we have is only flood irrigation in India. That is the reason why what we are witnessing is ruthless exploitation of groundwater tables. They are coming down drastically. So the state, howsoever efficient and sincere the state may be, if the farmers are not willing to cooperate, then then it will be a failure. In almost all the states, as you can see here, as we discussed in some of the previous questions also, what you can see that the central government has made it mandatory that if the state governments have to take more loans from the central government as part of the FRBM, 3%, states are allowed only 3%. After that, 0.5% was given unconditionally. Rest of the loans can be taken by state governments only when they implement these power sector reforms. This has been strongly opposed by all the state governments. They said that they don't want to fix motors to their motors, to the motors to the meters to the motors of the farmers. State governments are giving huge amount of power subsidy. So when so much of power is given to them free of cost, it is resulting in exploitation. And most of the time, the kind of power that they are using is only thermal power. 70% of electricity generation in India is done still through thermal power only, and that is where the problem is coming up. Also, we are degrading ecological systems by these subsidies. Now, it requires what is called wisdom, experience, and foresightedness on the part of the people here. The farmers must recognize the fact that they are causing huge amount of damage to the ecological systems. Industrial sector, big industries, they must realize the fact that in the name of economic growth and development, they are ruthlessly exploiting the mineral resources, forest resources of the country, resulting in environmental degradation. They must be willing to accept their responsibility. And politicians, the political executive must also recognize their own responsibilities because they are only interested in their short-term political gains. They are not at all worried about the long-term consequences. That is the reason why you can see that competitive populism is the order of the day. Media itself has its own vested interest. They are only interested in sensational things. The media never reports the basic problems faced by the people. Take the case of during the corona crisis when lakhs of people were walking on the streets. Media never reported them. For them, the most important news was the suicide of an actor. That is where we talk about these things. So that is the reason why, what we say here is that central government, state government, local self governments, bureaucracy, media, private sector, then the self-help groups, women associations, and then regional groupings and farmers associations, all of them must come together to attain, to achieve the objectives of what is called the sustainable development goals. Why? Because bureaucracy is only interested in, as part of Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, Samarth Shiksha Abhiyan, bureaucracy is only interested in enrolling the students. You can see the outcomes, learning outcomes. Ninth standard student in Bihar cannot solve the problems of second standard. And they are all educated, going by Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. That is where we need real effective implementation. We need active participation of stakeholders everywhere else. And that is what you have to write for this question. Go to the next question. Groups work to elevate issues on the policy agenda or seek to deny other groups the opportunity to place issues. In this background, discuss the role of interest groups in agenda setting in developing countries. In fact, what we have discussed for the previous question, you can write the same thing here also for the same question. So what we have these pressure groups is that they do two important things. One is they will try to bring up their own agenda, or they will try to deny other groups opportunity to place their issues. If you look at the farmer agitation that went on in the country for such a long period of time, especially in Delhi, they were only talking about their own the farm bills, and they were not allowing opportunities for others to come out with their own grievances against the farmers. So what happens is that these pressure groups, similarly take the case of this caste-based organizations in India. They are only interested in getting more reservations for their communities and not anything else. Take the case of region-based organizations in India, regional associations. Take the case of communal based organizations in India. They don't allow other groups to come out and come out and express their demands also. That is where the problem is. They influence, because what is the basic issue here? The basic issue here is that in democracy, at the end of the day, it is all about the numbers. Please remember, democracy is not about welfare of people, as we always think. It is all about the number game. If you can get 100 people come together and agitate on a street for 2 days, the government will come down and accept your demands. If you get 10,000 people, if you get 10,000 people, if you get 1 lakh people, 1 lakh farmers who have gathered on the outskirts of Delhi have hijacked the agenda of the government. They have decided the issues on behalf of around 11 crore strong farmer community in the country. Please remember, only 1 lakh farmers participated in this movement. There was no participation from South India, from eastern part of the country, or other parts of the country, central part of the country. Only farmers from 2 states, in Haryana and Punjab. They hijacked the agenda. They don't allow opportunities for other groups to place their issues. Farmer Association South India, they wanted to come out with their own assessment of this farm bills. They were not allowed because they have used their proximity to the capital. Imagine if Punjab and Haryana were in the country, South India, would they have exercised so much of influence? Not at all. That is where the problem is. Similarly, take the case of these powerful pressure groups like these industry associations, whether it is ASSOCHAM or CIA or FICCI. They always make sure that their demands are discussed, their demands are accepted by the government in the budgets. In the process, they don't allow opportunities for others to raise their issues also. That is where the problem is. You have to give all these examples. So after giving all these examples, as usual, you have to come out with a solution also. So what is the solution that we are talking about? We must ensure decentralization of decision-making process. If the decision-making process is centralized at one particular place, then automatically the interests of other sections of society are never reflected in the decision-making process, because the entire administration of the country would become Delhi-centric, and that is when it becomes problematic. We need decentralization and participation so that we are able to provide opportunities for other interest groups also to come out with their demands and also get their demands fulfilled. That is what you have to write for this question. Let us come to the next question and the last question. Civil servants generally tend to exhibit the values and ethical framework of the political executives under whom they function. This is what we study with this is what we study with Fredericks also. What Fredericks has said is that whatever may be the country, in any country in the world, it is the political subsystem that dominates the functioning of all other subsystems. It is political subsystem that determines the values and behavior of other subsystems. This is more so in developing countries like India, as Rix says, wherein you have what is called unbalanced polity, wherein you can see that it is the political executive who completely dominates the functioning of bureaucracy. They dominate the values, they dominate the framework, ethical framework of the political executive. You have to give the examples here. So what you have to write here is that Max Weber spoke about unbalanced polity. Max Weber had spoken about balanced polity, wherein he said that political executive is responsible for policy formulation, bureaucracy for its implementation. Political executive will take into consideration values, whereas bureaucracy has to implement the policy strictly according to rules and regulations. And political executive will take into values like equity and inclusiveness, whereas bureaucracy has to implement the policy strictly according to rationality, economy, and efficiency. And he expected the bureaucracy to be completely value neutral because he said that they are instruments. As instruments, they should be completely value neutral. That is what Max Weber has said. But in reality, it is not the case, especially in a country like India. If you look at India between 1950s and 1960s, 1947 to 1967, we had what we call balanced polity. After 1967, what we have seen is politicization of our bureaucracy, especially from 1970s onwards, when the then Prime Minister imposed emergency. She said she wanted what is called a committed bureaucracy. She said that bureaucracy must be committed to they must be committed to the ideology of the ruling political party in power and not to the ideals of the constitution. That is when bureaucracy had lost all its ethical competence and had become handmaiden of the political executive. There was complete politicization. So that is the reason why from then onwards, political executives started dominating the values of civil servants. As pointed out by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, he wanted his secretary to say no to what he says. He's being paid by the government of India handsome salaries only to say no and not to say yes. But unfortunately, what we are witnessing is complete politicized bureaucracy, wherein the civil servants they exhibit the values and ethical framework of the political executive only under whom they function. For example, when the present government is talking about liberalization, privatization, globalization, that is the reason why the bureaucrats working in the ministries and departments are talking about privatization. The same bureaucrats who worked under the previous government, take the case of UPA government, the same bureaucrats worked under the UPA government also between 2004 and 2014, wherein they were strong votaries of what we call socialism. They never wanted to privatize anything because they were reflecting the values of the political executive. That is what is happening. And that is where democracy can be in peril. Because as a civil servant, you know, you cannot, as Paul Appleby says, what is required is political neutrality and policy commitment. Unfortunately, what we are witnessing is politicization of civil services. After writing all these things, you have to come out with the solutions also. You have to talk about the governance reforms in civil services, wherein you must ensure independent and autonomous functioning of bureaucracy by depoliticizing the functioning of our bureaucracy through various reforms suggested by Second Administrative Reforms Commission. You must have a central civil services board which should take care of transfers, promotions, suspensions, and all other career-related aspects of the civil servants. You must have social audit of performance of bureaucracy, and this social audit should be the basis of their career progression. And we must stop this practice of political executive giving retired bureaucrats post-retirement positions in the government to buy their loyalty. And we must also replace the ex post accountability that we have in our civil services with ex ante accountability. All these are the reforms that needs to be implemented, and that is what we say as far as in making sure that bureaucracy functions in an impartial and unbiased manner. Otherwise, we will have a situation wherein the civil servants mostly will be exhibiting the values and ethical framework of their political executive, which can result in systematic corruption, which can result in complete politicization of civil services. Right? So, in a very quick manner, in 2 hours time, we have completed, and we also had a very in-depth discussion of all the questions also. Right? If you have any doubts, you can ask. If you have any doubts, you can ask. If you have any doubts from whatever that we have discussed, you can ask. We have 1 more minute left here, right? You can ask. On Sunday, that is on 27th morning, we will have paper 2 discussion, Indian administration discussion for 2 hours, just like what we had now. It will be on Sunday morning at 8:30 to 10:30. We will have Indian administration discussion also, right? So we can stop it here for today, and we will meet on Sunday and discuss paper 2. Till then, take care of yourself and best of luck, right? If you have any doubts, you can ask, otherwise I can end this discussion. Right, then we can stop.